Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Recruiting Rundown here on Gamecock Central. Wes Mitchell, Kendall Smith joining you here, and we promised we would be back for an early edition, I guess early in the week edition of the Recruiting Rundown, because we want to talk this past weekend, not necessarily the final score between South Carolina and Alabama, but we want to talk about what happened in the recruiting world. There were a lot of guys in Columbia over the weekend, visiting, taking in the atmosphere, experiencing everything that South Carolina has to offer. And Wes, I know you talked to some of those guys, you got some feedback, so we'll hear about that. But I think the first thing that we have to talk about is just the game itself, right? So we mentioned this last week on the show. South Carolina needed to keep it competitive, and they certainly did that. It was a great game, didn't end up going in South Carolina's favor, but with a game like this one, West, do you feel like there's more value in what South Carolina put on this past weekend, a close game, keeping it competitive, versus what I think a lot of people probably expected to happen in that game was just a massive win from Alabama? That didn't happen. So does that play better with recruits?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think if you're going to be honest, yeah, you would have loved to take advantage of the opportunity and those recruits see you get this massive win. Maybe see the field get stormed again. I know that was one thing last year that I guess it would have been the A&M game when South Carolina stormed the field. The recruits at that game just wouldn't stop talking about that. So I think it's a missed opportunity in some ways, yet it still 1,000% beats the alternative of it being a game, frankly, kind of like the Oklahoma game, where it just felt like as that game progressed and as the lead got bigger and bigger towards Oklahoma's end, you're kind of going, I feel like this game may be over, and the fans were kind of sensing that as well. The atmosphere kind of disappeared. This was a game where, if you're Shane Beamer, you certainly don't love the fact that you're 3-5, and other schools are probably going to use that against you, frankly.
Right.
But what you do love is that you had probably your best recruiting list of the entire season there to watch you go toe-to-toe with number 4, frankly, be in a position to go win the game. And you had an atmosphere that was special. And, everybody kind of talks about that. Every school talks about that. But even on the broadcast, if anybody that was at the game and went back and rewatched it, you would hear the announcers multiple times just be like, hey, this is one of the most underrated atmospheres in the entire country. If you're wanting to go experience an SEC atmosphere, you need to come to this place and stuff like that. So I think those things play. Certainly, it's a lot easier to convince a recruit. Most of these guys are very confident in their abilities. Very easy to convince them, hey, you can come in and be a difference maker, but we're a couple of plays away versus come be a difference maker, but we're 3 touchdowns away, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And shout out to the Gamecock fans that were in attendance, because you are spot on with that, Wes. I was not at the game. I was watching it, and it looked incredible. Again, the announcers were talking about it, but not even on the broadcast. On X specifically, I was seeing it across social media, but on X specifically, so many people that had nothing to do with South Carolina, by the way, they're just football fans or sports fans or SEC fans, were commenting on how impressive that atmosphere was. And for South Carolina to only be a 3-win team with that atmosphere was truly remarkable. So shout out to all the fans that were there. You made it look really, really good. And I'm sure that a lot of recruits noticed that. So with that, Wes, let's get into what the recruits had to say about their weekend in South Carolina. I know we had some big names in attendance last weekend. So who did you talk to? What did they say?
Yeah, and, me and Chris kind of a lot of times trade these off. Chris did most of the legwork this week on getting reactions. I'll tell you a guy that I think we should talk about that I imagine is not going to do interviews at this point, but is such a big name that we should still talk about him. It's Zion Ely, who was a little bit of I would say, a surprise visitor. It's somebody South Carolina obviously has been trying to get on campus again. He's a 5-star guy, number 1 edge in the 2026 class, has been committed to Maryland for a while, Kendall, but kind of quietly took an unofficial visit to South Carolina this summer. It's kind of at various times, I would say, said he's firmly committed to Maryland, but then at various times there's been 2 or 3 other schools, South Carolina among them, that he has continued to show a little bit of interest in. And So I think this was huge to get him on campus. Again, I'd be shocked if he does an interview or gives a quote about it. Maybe I'll be wrong. He's kept it kind of low key, but if you follow the visits there, the fact that they got him on campus and got him in for this game certainly maybe speaks to something heading into, as we're actually getting fairly close, believe it or not, to that December signing date. So if you're South Carolina, you're trying to make your final pushes right now. Also in the realm of flip targets, Julian Walker, who, of course, we've talked about here on the show, is a guy that is here local, has the connections to the school with his dad being on staff with the strength and conditioning program, has been committed to Michigan since the summer, but consistently has shown up at Williams-Brice Stadium this season, is still scheduled to visit Michigan for their big game with Ohio State in a few weeks, but follow the visits there as well. And I get it's local. I get it's his dad. He wants to go support, but I don't think you can ignore the fact that he has been to South Carolina so many times at this point. So continue to track that situation there. Those are two major kind of defensive end, edge, pass rush prospects, Kendall. We'll get into a couple other guys here in a second. But to me, those were two of the headliners. Those are probably the headliners, especially when you're talking about like this current class, this 2026 class, which is mostly filled up if you're South Carolina. There's just a handful of guys out there that you're still recruiting, trying to add to that class that is top 20 in the country right now.
Absolutely. And we talk about 2026 guys and just trying to add on and kind of finish that class. And then we look ahead to 2027. And that's really where the bulk of South Carolina's focus is right now in terms of recruiting, because those guys are juniors this year, obviously have a lot of decisions to make and a lot of visits to take over the next several months. And some big names were on campus from the 2027 recruiting class. What did they say, Wes?
Yeah, I think obviously we talk about him all the time now. Joshua Dobson. I'm still trying to gather a little bit more intel on him, but the visit did go well. He gave Chris a brief statement, that everything was good on the trip. Trying to get a little bit more detail on that one, but certainly to get him in, for him to be all smiles, for him to take another visit. He was at the Virginia Tech South Carolina game in Charlotte, but to get him back to see that atmosphere that we were talking about at Willie B was certainly a big deal, I think. Nate Carson, who's a top 4 in-state prospect as well for 2027 from Irmo, he gave really, really good reviews. That's somebody else. Those guys, he and Jaden Bryant at Irmo, they've been at South Carolina just over and over and over again this year. So their familiarity with the program right now, I think, is really high. And it's one of those battles, Kendall, that we've seen South Carolina just in general typically win. Like they're gonna enjoy the process. They were at Alabama actually a couple of weeks ago. They've seen some other schools, but they kind of keep coming back to South Carolina. Those are, like I said, those are battles Beamer and the staff tend to win 9 times out of 10 because those relationships kind of hold up. Mm-hmm. Aiden Gibson is another one. He's a Woodruff running back, 2027. He basically told Gamecock Central, hey, everything stood out. I know his quote was, "I know they didn't win. I loved how they fought. I'm not concerned about their record. They are looking a lot better. And I loved how they all showed love to me and how they treated me. What really stood out to me was when something bad happened, they never gave up and the coaches kept coaching." So, we've got, if you go to Gamecock Central right now, Chris has a Recruits React story where it's just quick hitters from a bunch of different guys that were on campus. Franklin Whitley is another for the 2026 class. I should have mentioned earlier, Kendall, we talked about him in the lead-in on that recruiting rundown, how he took his official visit to South Carolina the week prior. He did make it back on campus this week. He told Chris it was great despite the loss. I liked how engaged the coaches were, especially during the big plays. The atmosphere was crazy. Says he spoke again with Coach Beamer and with the defensive staff. So, these trips always go well, but they certainly go a good bit better when you compete, when you're playing a top opponent, and certainly, I would say sometimes just as importantly, when the fans are engaged as they were. I think we got to give another shout out. I know how demoralizing the loss the week before to Oklahoma had to be for fans sitting in the stands. So to show out again, one of the announcers made the comment like, yeah, there might be 85,000 people in this stadium. I think there were 85,000 more outside the stadium tailgating before the game. So all that stuff matters, honestly. You would have loved to finish this thing off and have the big win, like I said, but Gamecock Nation, notwithstanding the Gamecock Twitter infighting that's happening after the game, Gamecock Nation doing their part at the games.
For sure. And yeah, it's so much, right? Like winning that game would have been huge, not only for the program, but recruiting wise as well. South Carolina kept it close though. And I think the other thing that you were talking about, like a lot of these guys mentioning how engaged the coaches were, how the team didn't give up if something didn't go their way, like they're noticing those things too. So it's not just about the conversation that they have with Shane Beamer or whichever coach is recruiting them or the atmosphere that they're noticing. Yes, all of those things play a part in their experience, but it's also when they're just watching and paying attention to how the team is reacting, how the staff is reacting. And for South Carolina to be able to show that it really is, a great group of people that are involved in the program, I think that that's super important too. So it's good to hear that a lot of these recruits had great things to say. And as you mentioned, we have a story over on GamecockCentral.com thanks to Chris Clark, Recruits React, plus a lot more content over there. So be sure to check it out. You can follow us on social media as well at Gamecock Central. But Wes, thank you so much for the updates. We certainly appreciate it as always. And we appreciate all of you for tuning in and for joining us. So for Wes Mitchell, I'm Kendall Smith. This has been the Recruiting Rundown here on Gamecock Central, and we'll see you soon. Have a great night, everybody.